Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Varelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple, and we have another interview for you coming up with a very special guest. But first, I wanted to give you a quick update. At the time of this recording, we are rolling literally through the holiday season, and this year we've had runners finished races in Berlin, London, Twin Cities, New York, and Chicago, and other events across the country. We've also had gyms and group fitness teams hosting our push-pull events and all sorts of other fundraisers. And as we end the year, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who is helping to spread awareness, raise funds, and help us fight for a world without pancreatic cancer. If you'd like to see how to get involved, visit projectpurple.org and follow Project Purple on all social media channels. We are currently recruiting for all our 2023 races, and thank you for a wonderful 2022. And as we roll into 2023, we are super excited to be back in many of our cities, hosting events, running marathons, and continuing to raise awareness for pancreatic cancer families as they battle with their journey. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest today, coming to us all the way. I say that I say that a lot, but we've had guests from the UK, but Becca Dixon coming to us all the way from the United Kingdom, just outside of London. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Rebecca. I think you're like our fourth or fifth. Oh, this is bad. So I have like, I'm trying to think here. Like I should have did this before. So this is note to the staff here. We have to do a better job of doing our homework. I'm going to say you're our fifth guest from the UK.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for being on the podcast, but this is a testament to, what this has become, because we've had guests from the UK on here before, and it's always awesome that we cross the pond, as we say, right? Like crossing the pond. And the really amazing thing I think that this allows us to do here on this podcast, bring guests from outside the United States, is just to really show the magnitude and the impact of this disease isn't just a disease here in the US.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And this is, I know you and I were just talking briefly before we hit record. I was recently in London. We've worked with our UK partners that are in the UK, raising awareness, running events. And it's just so cool, to have this ability to bring guests on from other parts of the world that are going through this same fight, and share their journeys and their stories. Because again, it's just kind of like, really like, I don't know, for me, maybe it's just me and maybe I'm overthinking this, but it's just wild that we're able to bring guests from, the UK and other parts of the world that are battling, because it just really resonates that this is a world fight. This is not just something that's happening here in the United States, but as you and I were talking about, the more awareness, the more stories we tell, the more amplification that we give this thing, pancreatic cancer, and sharing stories and saying like, hey, we need help. We need people to get involved. We need people to get engaged. We need people, and I'm not talking about money. Money certainly does help. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But, making the awareness, that's how we're really going to change this thing on a global perspective, because this isn't going to be the United States, finding a cure. It could be a researcher in the UK. It could be someone in Italy. It could be someone in Australia, right? We just don't know that. But the more and more that we tell these stories from a global perspective, the greater impact I truly believe we'll have. Yeah. So thank you for joining us. I know I rambled there a little bit. My coffee's kicking in. I know it's a little bit early here in the United States. It's afternoon there in the UK, but I want to thank you for joining us here. And I'm looking forward to hearing your story. And as I said before we hit record, our first part of our podcast is really our guest opportunity to share with our audience their journey with pancreatic cancer. And as I said before we hit record, you can go as far back as you want to share kind of your journey, to bring us up to date, and you can stay as high level as you want as well. And with that, the microphone is yours, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about being here because when I got diagnosed, one of the most important things to me was to spread awareness of this condition. So what happened to me is back in May, I just woke up with some stomach pain. I didn't think too much of it. I thought that it would kind of disappear after a couple of days, but it didn't. We actually went away to France while I was having this stomach pain, and while I was there, it seemed to be becoming worse and worse. And I don't know if I told you, but I'm a nurse, so I did the typical nurse thing of self-diagnosing myself and decided that I had pancreatitis. And actually, when we returned to the UK from France, we went to straight to A&E. But the queue was out of the door, so we didn't stay. Left it a couple of days, and they diagnosed me with a urine infection, and kind of just went from there. Started some antibiotics, and it didn't really improve anything. And I pushed and pushed and pushed to get some bloods and a scan done, which eventually did happen. And the blood showed that at that point, it looked like a chronic pancreatitis. So they referred me to the hospital, and I was admitted to hospital. And at that point, the scans were showing pancreatitis. There was no sign of a tumour at that point. And really the question was why I had developed this pancreatitis. And I waited for a endoscopic ultrasound at our tertiary hospital for 6 weeks, had that done. And again, they couldn't see anything that indicated cancer. And actually, by that point, I was asking every doctor that came across me, is this cancer? And there was no signs of a tumour at that point. I then got discharged. It was so that was 6 weeks later, I'd had this endoscopic ultrasound, at which point I was obviously discharged from the hospital. And I was kind of living at home with this kind of condition that nobody really knew, and everyone was really convinced that I was going to end up with autoimmune pancreatitis, and they thought it was just that. But because that's rare in itself, nobody really knew what to expect, I don't think. And so they were really fixated on that. And I had questioned a few times, are we so fixated on this autoimmune pancreatitis that we're missing a cancer, which is what I had questioned. But the scans didn't show a tumour, and I do accept that, if you can't see it, then it's difficult to diagnose it. So I kind of continued to become quite unwell, and at home I developed horrendous itching and a really obvious jaundice. And I got readmitted to hospital, and at that point they re-scanned me. And nobody had mentioned to me that they then suspected a cancer, but they had seen that one of my bile ducts had become quite swollen and narrowed. So they inserted a stent, and that made me so much better. I was the jaundice just drained from me. The itching stopped almost straight away. I was like a different person, but I did then start developing this back pain. But I didn't know that they were suspecting cancer at that point. I was discharged home and told that I would be reviewed. When I was reviewed, I was then told that I was being re-referred back to the tertiary centre, and they would do a biopsy. And as soon as they said that, I guessed what they were thinking. I went to the hospital to have my biopsy within we had like a 2-week cancer referral pathway. So I knew then that I was on this pathway. Nobody had really told me, but I kind of got the gist. And I went to go and have this biopsy. And when they sat me down to consent me for the biopsy, they said, obviously we have seen something on your scan that is sinister. Being a nurse, the word sinister gets used in cancer. And I said, no, it's not obvious, because I didn't know that. This is new to me. You're telling me. Nobody's told me. And they kind of tried to take it back a bit, but at that point I knew what was going to happen. And so they did the biopsies, and it was confirmed it was cancer. Within a couple of days, at the hospital, we sat down with the consultant. They told us the news then. I didn't know what the staging was. They didn't say anything. They just said that it had spread to the liver, but I am a nurse, I'm a pediatric nurse, so that's a different world to adult cancer medicine. So I was told that there was a spread to the liver, but I hadn't been told the staging. And then what happens is that is a local hospital, and then the local hospital referred me to the tertiary hospital, which then a couple of days later, they then told us that the staging was stage 4. But I guess we kind of knew at that point because we'd done some Googling, which obviously they all tell you not to do, but we had. And so we knew what we were going to get told. So that was kind of my diagnosis and my journey getting to that diagnosis, it was in September that I had finally been told that it was cancer. So it was between May and September. And I know that people go through a lot longer journey than that. And I have seen all my scans where I've seen that they clearly couldn't see this tumour. It was only when I got readmitted the second time when I was quite poorly that you can see that they then see this small mass. So it felt like a long journey, but I'm not sure it was. I just felt really quite rubbish throughout that time. And then because our tertiary centre had a trial to join up to, I was then advised that I should go to the tertiary centre for my treatment, which is about an hour's drive from here. So I'm under the tertiary centre for my treatment, and they signed me up to a trial for my chemotherapy, and I'm currently having that, and I've just had my 6th round of chemo, and I'm about to have my 7th tomorrow, which at the moment is going well. And then I've been on this trial now for a couple of months, and as part of the trial, every 2 months you get scanned to see what's happening. So I had my first scan after 2 months, which was 4 rounds of chemo, and had those results just before Christmas, which was massively anxiety inducing waiting for those results. We waited for 2 weeks for the results, which felt like years. And we had them, and at the moment it's going well, and the tumour size is reduced. So that was amazing news to go into Christmas with. But it's difficult because you just don't know what to expect. And so that's kind of my journey. The big thing for me is that I found it really difficult to relate to other people that have been in this situation. So when I first got diagnosed, we obviously went into research mode, spending hours and hours looking for things, looking for stories, looking for positive outcomes. And the thing that I have found with pancreatic cancer is that I don't really know how to word it other than that it kind of appears to be an older cancer. So everything that I found, particularly sort of UK stories, was stories about my 70-year-old mum has just been diagnosed, or my 80-year-old dad's just been diagnosed. And I found it so difficult to find any stories that were 30-year-olds, 36-year-olds like me who've got 2 young children, and how do you cope with that situation with pancreatic cancer? And so that's why I wanted to do something like a podcast and spread my stories, because if I couldn't find that, and if someone else is in my situation and finds my story and sees what treatment I'm on and sees what I'm doing, then maybe that will help them. So that's kind of my story.
Wow. So you gave it up, and I know my mom always said never ask a woman her age. So you're 36.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that. So I want to, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I know this is not easy to kind of go through those steps for a variety of reasons. So I really appreciate you opening up and allowing our audience to hear that. I got a couple questions, and I want to go all the way back.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go, and I always preface this question and say that we know hindsight's always 20/20, right? So I don't ask this question to have people kind of beat themselves up. That's not what this is about. But just to think about, prior to May 22, you're a nurse, so you get it. You understand your body probably more. You also probably understand the system and how to advocate, which we'll talk about. were there any health issues that,
Nothing.
that we could raise a flag to that would say like, hey, is there a family history of cancers or anything?
No. So, I mean, this is something that's being looked into. They're looking at genetics, and I've had genetic
Yeah.
bloods. Those results should be back relatively soon. And from my understanding, pancreatic cancer can be one of those where you can develop a gene. So they are looking at that for me. But no, I was healthy, maybe a bit overweight, needed to lose a bit of weight, but not massively. I just, yeah, nothing. The stomach pain was a bit of a shock. The only thing that had happened maybe about 10, 12 years ago was that I had developed similar pain and ended up with gallstones, and my gallbladder had been removed. So initially I thought, oh, this feels like when I had gallbladder pain, but actually I don't have one, so it can't be that, and kind of moved on. But that's the only thing that I'd ever had kind of any medical treatment for. There was nothing else at all.
Interesting. I got a question when stomach pain, and what was your stomach pain like? And I know you just said like gallstones, and I said interesting when you had your gallbladder removed. I had my gallbladder removed in 2019, and I would just have like these massive sharp pains, like it was excruciating. I know people, the doctor's like, oh, it's like passing a stone. And I ended up having gallstones, right, that were lodging in there. And it was just, so when you said in 22, you were having similar pain. So was it like that similar, like, was it sharp, dull?
Initially, no. Initially it was dull. It was kind of just sitting there, if that makes sense. It was just there. It was kind of sat just below my ribs. It was just a kind of rumbling pain. I went out for dinner with friends. I went to my sister's baby shower. I was still doing things. It wasn't bothering me that much. When we were making the decision to go to France, which was like a couple of days later, we'd got this holiday booked, and I did remember saying to my husband, should we be going? I don't know whether I should be going because this pain is still there. And I kind of then put it back to the back of my head and thought, no, like it'll go by the time, and then you'll be wishing that you went. So we went. And actually, when I was in France, that's when it became that intense pain. And I don't know why, it was silly really, but I was kind of nervous about having to go to A&E in France, the language barrier. I don't speak any French. And I was thinking, what am I going to end up paying? And so I kind of thought I'll deal with it when I get home. But it started to become obvious that if I was eating anything fatty, that the pain was becoming more intense. And that's what made me start Googling. And that's when I came up with pancreatitis and thought, I've got pancreatitis, I'm fairly certain of it. So we were only there for 5 days. So as we were getting to the end, I was stopping having anything fatty because I'd kind of clicked that was making it worse. But it was like an intense pain in the middle of my chest that was just unbearable. And I remember thinking when I got back and them suggesting that I'd got a urine infection, you don't get pain like that with a urine infection. This is not a urine infection. But then they did do a urine dip and it showed things. So I thought, oh, Rebecca, maybe you're just trying to diagnose yourself and actually, just stop. You're not always a nurse. So I kind of stopped. But as soon as the antibiotics didn't make any difference, I knew that I knew what I needed to get done. And push for that.
So was it after you ate more so than like just through the day?
It was absolutely fine. And then as soon as I ate anything with any fat in it at all, it was just unbearable, and it would last for hours.
It's almost, and the reason why I asked that question, I mean, and this is like the frustrating part from the community, right? Is like these signs and symptoms are so, like that could just be like you said before, it was similar to like gallbladder pain, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the frustrating thing, right? Like we don't have this early detection test, right? Which is so frustrating. And I think the other thing, and this is where I and this is going to be I have a lot of loaded questions, Rebecca, and this is one of many where I'm going with this and talking about signs and symptoms being so vague. As a clinician, now I know you're not in the cancer space, you're in pediatrics, but you know enough, right? You know what you know. I don't want to put blame on the medical community, but it's also frustrating, right? Because these signs and symptoms are vague, but I feel like our medical community, I guess I'll speak from here from the United States, because, you said you went from May to September, which isn't a long period of time, but it is kind of, some people, I know some people, we've had stories where people similar, and then we've had people within 2 weeks, like they've been
Yeah,
diagnosed,
yeah.
and it's like hit or miss. I remember a guy, like he had, he thought he was having a pancreatic, like he went to an ER in Florida. The first person diagnosed him with pancreatitis, but he's like, dude, I don't drink. I didn't have any drinks. I'm not, the signs and symptoms of pancreatitis, that's not it. He had steak.
Mhm.
And he just had this massive pain. And then the second person that comes in is like, let's dig deeper. And they find that he has, a tumor, a mass, like within like hours, they figured this out. Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess my point here is being in the medical field, I know you've mentioned, the self-diagnosis you mentioned,
Mm.
and then doing your own research. It's just, that had to be frustrating because you know enough, but like you're not getting the answers from the medical community.
Yeah.
Like the system that you have. And I'm not trying, I mean, this happens here in the United States. It's
Yeah.
not just,
No.
I don't think this is like a UK public health system versus private healthcare system. This is a global problem.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, initially, up until I got admitted to hospital, in hospital I felt listened to. It was up until then I felt like I was kind of being fobbed off. I'm not overly dramatic, although I was in a lot of pain. I perhaps didn't present like that. And so I was saying, this is the worst pain I've ever felt. I've had 2 children and this is worse than that. and I think I wasn't coming across like that. But for me, I did see, I'm saying it's a short amount of time because perhaps I pushed. And I remember saying, actually, if this was somebody else, if this was someone who didn't have the confidence to push or didn't have the confidence to keep going back, that perhaps they wouldn't, would they be diagnosed now? Like it would have taken so much longer. Whereas this was over kind of a week's period where I was going to the doctor, got a UTI diagnosis, came back a couple of days later, went to the doctor again, said, no, this isn't it. Went to the doctor again. And then the third time when I went to the doctor, I said, please, can we do bloods and a scan? And that's when I felt listened to, and they did it and called me almost immediately after my bloods came back and then got admitted. So it was kind of, I knew what I needed. It was getting there, but would someone else have the confidence to say, I need bloods and a scan, please, can we do it? Probably not. And it is frustrating, definitely.
Yeah, I hate to beat up on and we're not beating up on the medical community. I get it. I tend to think that it's more the systems and not the people, right? Because I know here in the US, insurance typically runs the roost in terms of, clinical trials, and are you clinical trial eligible, and have you done, 6 rounds of Flornox before you become eligible, before you can even apply to a clinical trial, right? Or, they have to do, this procedure, you have to do the EUS before you do the MRI or the CAT scan, right? And sometimes it's a scheduling issue, with just getting in to see, a specialist to do that type of exam versus just going straight to the CT or straight to the MRI. So again, I didn't bring this up to pick on anyone individually. I just think it's the systems, but I do feel we can do a lot better, right? Like, and this is where advocating and raising awareness and sharing that. So on that note, as you look back, and this is another loaded question, no right or wrong answer. Was there anything, and I know you said confidence, you just mentioned confidence. Is there anything that you can kind of point, not necessarily a tipping point, but maybe as you look back, hindsight being 2020, advice that you would give to someone, given your experience, like getting those answers or continuing to push? What type of advice would you give to people, that might be in a similar situation right now, today, listening to the podcast?
My advice would be that if you think that there is something not right and you're not getting that action, that you should just continue to push until you do get that action. And actually, you're perfectly, I mean, here in the UK, you could go to a different hospital or a different doctor and ask for advice and ask for those bloods and ask for a scan. It's difficult. I mean, I don't it is hard because I think a lot of it is awareness and understanding here. I think that certainly as kind of my journey went on, the feeling was that I was too young to have pancreatic cancer, and so it was kind of discounted, but actually clearly not, because I do. And I think maybe it's just having that awareness and understanding. And I have no doubt that all the health professionals that were involved with my case that know now what this diagnosis was will never forget that, and will always use that whenever they're presented with similar symptoms. But my advice is that if you feel that you're not getting anywhere, is to keep pushing and advocate for yourself, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because it's your life and your body, and you know best.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and thank you for sharing that. I think the one, and this goes back to the system. I guess I'm beating up on the system today, but we put doctors and clinicians on such a high pedestal across the world. This is not in the United States, and I think people sometimes feel like they're overstepping a boundary by doing that. So do you feel because you were in the medical field that kind of gave you kind of a little bit of an advantage or disadvantage, maybe because, like we said, you know more than the average person, right, going in?
Yeah.
So do you think
I
that was
think
an advantage or disadvantage?
gave me confidence to question. It gave me confidence to say, actually, could we just do some bloods, or could we just check this, or that. It definitely gave me that confidence. But I guess it's hard because I don't have an understanding of pancreatic cancer, and I don't have an understanding of sort of adult medicine. So there were some things that I would question, and I mean, actually, from day one of being in hospital, the first thing I said is this cancer? And I was told, no, like, cancer, you're too young. So actually, I had actually diagnosed myself months ago. Yeah, I think it's an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage of knowing stuff is that you know too much when it becomes hard and it becomes about you, and then you sort of catastrophize everything because you think of all the worst case scenarios that you know of from when you've been in that situation at work. But it definitely has the advantage of knowing the system, knowing that you can contact the medical secretary to get answers, or knowing who to contact within the hospital or within the GP surgery, and also, having confidence to question things, I think.
Now, going back to where you currently are, you're in this clinical trial, you're going through the treatments. Have they given you kind of like a playbook in terms of like, okay, we're going to do this for 12 rounds, we're going to scan every 3 months, and then we're going to kind of reassess? Or where does that look for you?
So I guess that's a little bit of the story that I've kind of missed, actually. So initially, when I first went to the tertiary centre, I was told about this trial. We had to make the decision whether I would go on to the trial or whether I would go to the standard FOLFIRINOX treatment. That's an impossible decision when you have little knowledge or understanding of these treatments. And I was lucky because I've got a very close friend who works within kind of the pediatric cancer world. So she spent hours and hours researching for me, and then we made that decision to go on to the trial. The trial runs for 6 months, and you have 2 monthly scans. And so it's around 12 to 13, I think it's 12 rounds of chemo. And then we had kind of said, and then what next? And I kind of feel, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but I kind of feel here that with cancers that we don't really talk about what's next. We kind of just wait and see what happens. Whereas I'm more of I like to know what the next plan is. And I appreciate that might not happen, but I need to know what it is. So I never really got that understanding of what happens next after the chemo. But when we had talked about whether there was a possibility of surgery, tumour is operable. It's just that we've got these mets on the liver. They had kind of said to us, well, no, that wouldn't be an option. However, we had managed to find someone who had been in a similar situation to me and had had surgery. And so we contacted the surgeon that she was under, which is at a different hospital, and we did have an appointment with him. And his kind of feeling was that if the chemo was, had an effect, and I did respond to chemo, that there may be a possibility of surgery. So there's quite a difference in approach, I guess. It may be that the tertiary symptom under, say, after 6 months, oh yeah, no, actually you've responded really well, that's fine, yeah, we will look at surgery, but they don't really discuss the possibilities. They just told us it was really unlikely. So I can't really say what's next, because I don't know. I'm kind of aiming for this surgeon at a different hospital now, and his letter basically said if there was a response, then he would consider it. So that's kind of my aim, is to get my scan sent over to him and let him make that decision. But it feels very much like I need to take on managing who's going to do what and what's going to be next. And I have to admit, I didn't realise that was a thing. I didn't realise that that's how it works. And actually, from you nodding, I'm assuming that this is the same in the US as it is in the UK. And working in paediatrics, I had always assumed that it would always be that every option would be put on the table to the family and that child, and they would make that decision. But from my experience now as an adult in the healthcare system, is that that's not the case. It's very much based on your centre that you've gone to and how they manage things. And what I didn't realise is that there might be somebody out there who then has other skills, other ways of managing it, and you're not really told those options unless you seek them. So now I'm very much kind of going along the lines of, okay, well, I'm going to manage this. So my aim is to get the surgery, but I can't be sure that's what's going to happen because I don't know. Yeah.
Rebecca, I'm, as you said, I'm nodding. Yeah, it's crazy, right? Like you just explained, like that to me, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, like it's insanity, right? Like you're battling, you're a mom, well, you're battling pancreatic cancer, right? And we all know the obvious, and but then you got to figure this out. Right.
Yeah.
And this is the most frustrating thing. I've been doing this 12 years, and regardless of where people are fighting this, there's no roadmap.
No.
Right. And this is the frustration that, I sigh here because, we just saw like the government. I'm going to go I'm going to go down a little rabbit hole here. And I don't care who I offend, quite honestly, because I hate pancreatic cancer more than anything. But, I just saw, the government just here in the United States just gave $15 million through the Department of Defense to pancreatic cancer research. We just passed a $1.7 trillion bill, whatever. I think it was like 1.7. I don't watch the news anymore. It was like insane amount of money. And there was like a lot of money that went to a lot of other causes. And I'm like, 15 million, you know what? 15 million is nothing. Like it's nothing. 15 million is the startup cost to open a lab here in the United States. So if I want to open a pancreatic cancer research lab, I need 15 million to do it. That's what that does.
Yeah.
But we don't have roadmap. We don't have early detection. We don't have treatments. So like government's one part of it, but to not have a roadmap globally on this disease, which, we know the statistics, we know the reality. It's not an old person's disease. It impacts everyone. Yeah, statistically, we can kind of look at the numbers and it'll say like people over 50 to 70 are really kind of like the bulk of it. But 50 years old's young.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You're 36. We've had people on the podcast in their 20s, so what? Does that mean that they don't matter? Like it's crazy, right? And it's just insane to hear you speak. I appreciate the honesty, but to say like, hey, you don't know, like, that's
Mm.
crazy. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not trying to focus on that, but it's just insane that we're, again, I've been doing this 12 years and we still don't have this roadmap. But kudos to you to find a friend who understands it in oncology, to find a surgeon that will do this, right? Because you have this fight to live and to figure out and do whatever you have to do. But like, again, here we are in 2022, like, we're talking about going to Mars, but we have patients that have to kind of navigate themselves through this journey of cancer. Like, it's mad.
I had no idea until I was in this situation how much you have to advocate for yourself. Otherwise, you really, obviously, my chemo is classed as palliative chemo, and my feeling is that unless I push for more, would there be more? Will they allow me to have more? And I just don't know whether, if I just sat back and said, oh, okay, that's fine. If that's what you say, that's what happens. If that would be it. And maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like it doesn't get talked about. There's no clear plan. There's no, oh, well, this is what would happen in this scenario, or this is what would happen in this scenario. It's just, well, we'll try this and then we'll see. And that makes it really hard. I mean, everybody's different, obviously, but for me, I need to know what I'm aiming for. And actually having met that surgeon gave me drive to know that I could aim for that. And I think that makes a real difference. If you're going through chemo and you're feeling horrendous, if you know that there's a reason that you're doing this, that you're going to push and aim for surgery or whatever's next, then it keeps you going, and it makes you think to yourself, okay, this feels horrendous, but I'm going to keep going because, I can do it for this.
So powerful, because you're 120% right. You have people in your corner that are pushing for you, versus, like you said, like, if you didn't advocate and if you didn't push, what would be the outcome? Who knows, but I'm excited to hear that you found someone, because many people don't. But it's also super, super frustrating, right? From a patient advocate, to hear that you've got to do these things and, like, these things aren't offered and there's no roadmap. And I go again, this is the power of sharing stories. And I'm not tooting our horn here, but I know many groups share stories, whether they're written or through videos, that has increased in this community as pancreatic cancer community. And for anyone listening or watching, just find those stories. I would stay off the internet in terms of Google, because that could be kind of a dark place, which I know you mentioned a bit in the beginning, right? But finding, like, literature, or not literature, but just stories, right? Like, of people that have figured it out, because I think people want to help other people, but those are the powerful ones, right? How to navigate through the system. And that's where I think, sharing your journey and sharing, what you did is just so powerful. So thank you. I've got a couple questions here left for us. You talk a little bit about friends, and I know this comes up often about support. You're a young mom. I know we haven't talked about the kids yet. But what type of support have you gotten? And what does that support mean to you that you can share with our audience?
I mean, support professionally was quite hard to come by, if I'm honest, from kind of professional support. And it took a long time. I felt like I needed some counselling with this situation, and it took a long time to get that, which I think is a shame. From my friends has been absolutely amazing. They've been there every step of the way. We're really honest with everybody from the very, very start. They've kind of been part of the journey from the beginning. And I kind of feel like everybody's had their roles. So I've had friends who will just come and sit and have coffee with me. I've got friends who, my like I said, my close friend, she works within the cancer world. She did loads of research. She was my researcher. You know, just being there to have a chat to talk things through with has been amazing. Family have been so supportive. My sister has been amazing. She's had a new baby, and yet she's kind of given up all her time to chat to me on the phone or be here with me when I've kind of felt like I don't want to be here on my own. My husband has been my complete rock, and my mum and dad have been so supportive too. I've had kind of from work, we've had lots of support. I've obviously got close friends at work who have been there kind of as friends, and then as kind of a work community, they've been supportive. They did a collection for us, which was just overwhelming, and it's meant that we'll be able to take our girls away for a couple of days. And my husband is a firefighter, and the fire service have been amazing to us. They have a fire service charity which is available for sort of family members as well as the firefighter. And actually just before Christmas they kind of have a hotel, and they sent us to the hotel, and we stayed there for a couple of days, which was lovely. And they've been an amazing support to us, giving my husband time off for appointments and things like that. So I can't fault the support we've had. We've just had, you know, I think people, I don't know, I was thinking about this. I was thinking, gosh, what would I have done if it was one of my friends or somebody I knew that was in this situation? Would I have known to do all these things that my amazing friends have done? You know, I've had hampers brought round with food, hampers brought round with lovely things in for the girls, for us. And I was thinking, would I have known to do those things? But I don't think you do know to do those things. You just sense that that's what's needed by that person. And it's been so massively appreciated because, you know, at the very beginning, there was lots and lots and lots of low, hard days. Whereas now there's so many more sort of up days and less low days. But, you know, you might hit one of those low days and then you look at the front door and someone's left you this lovely hamper in the front door, and it just makes such a difference to you, and it just gives you that boost again. So yeah, support has been brilliant. And now I kind of feel like it doesn't really matter if I don't need that professional support. I have that kind of personal support, and that's what's needed more than anything. So yeah.
So powerful. How old are your kids?
10 and 5.
So they clearly know something's up with mom.
Yeah. So we've talked about mummy's got cancer, and mummy's going to have chemotherapy. There's a UK charity, and they provide little bears and books about the bear that's going to have chemotherapy. So we use that to kind of explain it to them. And they've got one of the little bears each, and his hair comes off and he can wear a wig and stuff. So we've talked about that. We've been really open with them. We've not talked about too much else because that's enough. And to be honest, they're aware of it, but they still need their lives to carry on, and they are just equally as demanding as they were before. So they haven't changed, which is fine. That's good for me. I'm pleased that they feel that they can just carry on, and they're a bit oblivious to the fact that mummy's on her chemo pump, even though it's right next to them. They're kind of, they still need their snacks. So
that's I'm giggling, I you know, in a positive way, because that's awesome to hear, right?
Yeah.
That the kids they're resilient, and they're being, you know, a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old,
exactly.
which is what you want, right? I'm sure you don't want them burdened with, you know, the dealing with the cancer diagnosis in their own way, but still being children.
Absolutely.
Which, thank you for sharing that. And you know, this is the thing. This cancer is not an old. You said it in the very beginning. It's not an old person's disease. Like, this impacts families. It impacts young people, and it's powerful to hear, but it's also impactful because these are the stories we need to tell. People need to wake up.
Yeah.
And I mean that in all seriousness. Like, this is impacting young people, just like many awful other diseases. And I think that's part of the reason globally that maybe people sometimes tend to shy away from it. Not to say that having a grandparent get the disease is not as worse as someone who's 36 years old, but I think there's like a little bit of a stigma, right? Like, oh, it's, you know, it only impacts older people.
Yeah,
I hate when I hear
absolutely.
that. Why, like older people don't matter?
Yeah.
But also it does impact younger people though.
Yeah.
Like that's ignorance, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so thank you for sharing that. I got two questions left for you. I know I asked you the advice on, you know, being an advocate, but this next question, just thinking about, and there's no right or wrong, this is another loaded question. Given what your experience, someone gets diagnosed today, what are maybe a couple things that the best bits of advice that you would give that person to do as they begin their pancreatic cancer journey? Coming from your perspective and what you went through, which is, you know, pertinent to you.
I think, firstly, don't Google. You're right. And don't, the stats are the stats. However, somebody said something to me which I thought was so important, because I had got myself in a real state about statistics, and she said statistics are a mean. There's somebody down there and there's somebody up there, and you have to push and hope that you're the person up there. And I think that's really important, and it changed my mindset completely, because I had got so fixated on the fact that these are statistics, and so that can be that is my story, that has to be my story. But actually, I don't know my story because it hasn't panned out yet. And so you just take a step back, take a breather. It is horrendous. It's a rubbish diagnosis, but actually you don't know how this is going to pan out for you. And for me, my biggest aim was that I knew that you can't control you can't control how you respond. You can't control how your cancer grows. You can't control those things. But what you can control is your mind and how you deal with it. And I do think that your mind is so important to kind of help you do better. And I think that, my biggest aim was never to let this define me. And actually my children carrying on as normal kind of shows me that they clearly aren't. Cancer isn't really a thing in the house. Mummy has chemo, and then there's 3 days where I just feel really rubbish, and then we just carry on like normal. And it was really important to me that that was what I wanted. And when I first got the diagnosis, people would say to me, what do you want to do? What do you want, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What things are there that you've always wanted to do? And I said, I just want normal, complete normal. So I don't want any of these big things. I just want to carry on, go and do the school run, come back, take the kids to the clubs. And if you can stay like that, then your head will calm down slightly. Because so if you do get that diagnosis, take a moment to have those tears, have that time where you are devastated, and then take a deep breath and say, okay, this is my story now, and I'm going to do as well as I possibly can. And I think that has helped me move on.
So powerful. And I love you bring up the statistics. And I've said this before. I don't think I've ever seen anyone say that you're either in that group or that group. And if there's doctors out there that tell people that, they're wrong. Right? So there's nothing in the statistics that says you're not part of the 11% or 12% of that survivability, right? But what you said is just so powerful, though. It's just a mean, right? Like it's a number, but there's nothing in that. And I think that's, and I've said this before, I think part of as being an awareness organization, I think sometimes we do lead with the bigger number because that's how we're trying to motivate people. But we also have to make sure people understand, like, there's no one out there that says you're not part of that other number. Like it's not like, and so that's where I think, statistics are what they are. I think people know what they are, but I think to your point, that mindset and knowing that you're in that group right now, right? So that's the mindset you have to have is just so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I've got one last question for you before we share with our audience where they can connect with you. if they want to reach out to you and learn more, and talk to you a little bit further about your journey. This last question is a loaded question. There's no right or wrong. It's my last loaded question. But given your experience, what you have gone through, how would you define pancreatic cancer? What's your definition of it?
Hard, sad, but from because I kind of went through that journey initially, what I found the hardest at the moment to kind of get my head around is that the actual pancreatic cancer is causing me no symptoms whatsoever. So when I come out of kind of my side effects week, I feel really, really well, which I guess makes it harder. But yeah, just hard. It's hard because of the statistics, I guess, because of kind of that understanding of what it means when you get that diagnosis. Yeah, tough. It's been a tough journey, but it's kind of made me a very different person. If I had been told a year ago, you're going to get this diagnosis, I'd have thought to myself, well, that's it. There's no way I'll be able to cope with that, not with my head. And I've just become this completely different person of like strength, I guess. So I kind of sometimes sit there and think, maybe I have just been given this to kind of raise awareness about pancreatic cancer and just become this different, stronger person that I wasn't before. But it's a tough lesson. It's a tough thing to go through for that.
Powerful answer. Thank you. There's no right or wrong to it. It's your experience, your definition. So thank you for sharing that with our audience, Rebecca. Our last thing here, someone listening might just be diagnosed.
Yeah.
They want to reach out, or people following your journey support you, help you raise awareness. Where's the best place for our audience to connect with you?
So through my Instagram. So I when I first got diagnosed, like I say, we were looking for stories, and we went straight to Instagram thinking that we would find loads of stories, and actually that wasn't the case. And I then felt really passionate that I wanted to share my story through Instagram. So I have an Instagram page called Fighting with Pancreatic Cancer, and yeah, I've just kind of been sharing my journey. Sharing my story. I have to be honest, I dip in and out of it because like some days or some weeks, like particularly when we were waiting for scan results, my head wasn't there. I just couldn't share what I wanted to share. But in general, I try and share the highs and lows of it all. And yeah, I'm more than happy for people to contact me through that, private message me through it, or follow my story. And yeah. And if there's somebody out there listening that also is in the same situation, I'd be happy to connect, because I really feel like it can be a lonely place. And so it's kind of good to share with somebody else who understands.
I love it. And I just went out and followed you here, Fighting with Pancreatic Cancer, Becca. I love it. Rebecca, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Project Purple podcast and sharing your journey, and really sharing, the story that this is not an old person's disease. Mm-hmm. I just saw a picture of your family, and it just, this is such an important story to tell. And I just want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share your journey. And I look forward to following you on social media and continue to see you have success. I have faith. You're an amazing person, and you're going to beat this thing.
Thank you. And also thank you for letting me share my story, because like I say, when I found out, I said, maybe it's the nurse in me, but I just want to help other people that go through this. And I want to raise awareness, and I want someone else, just even if it's one person, to listen to this and hear my story and say, oh my gosh, she's in the same situation as me. Oh, finally, there's somebody else that I can relate to. That would mean the world to me. That's what I've set out to do. So thank you for letting me share my story.
So powerful. Thank you for being a guest on the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you.
That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like this episode, feel free to share this episode. Make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on our YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, and be safe. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast.